Have any of you ever heard of the game God Hand? It was a 2006 PlayStation 2 game by developer Clover Studios and published by Capcom. It's an over-the-shoulder brawler where you go around beating up thugs and demons. It's off the wall and really frantic. It did not sell very well. The sales were so poor that the studio went under. Aww. But it's still fun and funny, and it experiments with some very interesting ideas, the most noteworthy being its dynamic difficulty system. The better the player does, the harder the game will get. Enemies will move faster, hit harder, and attack in groups. But conversely, a poor performance by the player will result in the game getting progressively easier. This adaptive, dynamic difficulty system ensures that this game proves a challenge to a wide variety of players. Novices will enter the game at an easy difficulty level and will likely stay there for quite a while as they learn the controls and combat techniques at their disposal. But skilled and veteran players will quickly get placed into one of the higher difficulties and struggle to stay there as they contend with the faster and deadlier enemies. Now, this concept of making the game harder for better players is probably at its most prominent in this game. But God Hand is far from the only one doing it. It's just the only one telling you outright and constantly reminding you. Many other games also employ some sort of adaptive difficulty to ensure both skilled players and lesser skilled players are both having a good time. So it shouldn't be terribly surprising to learn that our favorite galaxy-saving Lombax also utilizes such a system. Insomniac's 2003 outing, Ratchet and Clank 2, Going Commando, is one of the most endearing and highly regarded in a series that now spans 9 mainline entries and numerous spin-offs. But one of the reasons it might be so beloved is that it secretly customizes the difficulty to match the player's skill level. When I first heard about this, I couldn't believe it. I had beaten this game probably a dozen times, and I never noticed any differences across all my playthroughs, so I decided to check for myself. I played the first hour of the game across 2 different save files, simulating 2 different kinds of players. The first player plays very poorly, taking a lot of damage and dying frequently. You can think of this player as being young or disabled, or perhaps this is simply their very first video game and they don't understand what they're doing. The second player that I'm simulating will be a skilled veteran who performs flawlessly, not taking even a single point of damage from any enemy. I put the footage of these 2 theoretical players side by side, and yeah, the game really does go easy on somebody who's not playing very well. The game begins on a flying laboratory. Our heroic protagonist needs to make his way past a bunch of robots to get to the other end of the ship. The footage at the top of your screen is from the new player, who was dying constantly, while the footage at the bottom is from the player who was much more proficient. The first 2 rooms play out identically, but something changes once we reach the exposed bridge. The same enemies are presented to both players, but an additional health crate is provided for only one of them. It's a subtle change, but a small boost to the player who already died 5 times in the tutorial and might need some assistance. And as both players fight their way across the bridge, the veteran player has to contend with a third chainsaw bot that emerges. This enemy is not present for the new player. Both players ride the elevator. There are 2 chainsaw bots waiting to greet the new player, but the veteran has to get past 4 of them. Once they're disposed of, both players enter the room and watch the cutscene that plays out, only to be ambushed by more robots. 3 chainsaws and 2 flamethrowers for the newbie, but 4 chainsaws, 3 flamethrowers, and 2 additional blade balls for the veteran. Defeating all these enemies opens up the escape chute. Both players ride it and land on the wing of the ship, where some flamethrower bots are waiting. 2 for the new player, but 5 for the veteran. Hopping back into the ship, both players find themselves in a large open room. At the far end of the room is another health crate, but only for one of the players. The veteran gets nothing. As both approach the elevator, a flamethrower robot ambushes them, and the veteran player has an additional 4 chainsaw bots to dismantle. Next is a small hallway with a single flamethrower bot for the newbie, but 2 additional chainsaw bots for the veteran. And one of those chainsaw bots is right behind the door when it opens, a sneaky trick to steal some health from an inattentive player. And here we see another example of the new player being given more health crates to work with. And in the final room, a few robots make a very dramatic entrance. 3 for the newbie and 5 for the veteran. And that's the end of the first level. But if you thought this adaptive difficulty was limited to just the introductory mission, let me shatter that illusion as well. The next destination, Planet Uzla, plays the exact same tricks. The first mission takes the player on a path through the swamp and has them fighting 3 kinds of enemy: the Firefly, the Swamp Beast, and the Muck Dweller, a small slug-like creature. I counted how many of each enemy the players will encounter on their way to the destination. The new player fought 3 Fireflies, 12 Swamp Beasts, and 12 Muck Dwellers. The veteran player had to deal with 8 Fireflies, 22 Mutant Beasts, and 25 Muck Dwellers. And not only did the veteran player have twice as many enemies to fight, but once again, they were given fewer health crates. Here's one they didn't have access to. And right here is another one the newbie got that the veteran did not. And yet a third right here. Near the end of this path was a small sub-boss, the Swamp Monster. This creature isn't terribly tough. It can be defeated with 9 grav bomb attacks, regardless of who's launching them. And it only has one attack. It tries to smack the player with its tentacles. However, this attack is definitely a lot more accurate when used against the veteran player. After leaving Planet Uzla, the player is treated to their very first space combat mission. 2 waves of 20 ships need to be shot down before advancing. The game encourages the player to use all the tools at their disposal. Fire the lasers, launch the missiles, and of course,
do a barrel roll!
For this fight, the enemy AI is not smart at all. They frequently fly directly into the player's crosshair, practically begging to be shot. So I tried an experiment. Both players would simply fly in a straight line and spam the laser. They would only turn around once they seemed to be at the edge of the arena. Using this strategy, for a lack of a better word, the veteran player was able to defeat the first wave of enemies, but died early into the second wave, for a final kill count of 23. After a second attempt, they were a bit luckier and downed 25 before dying. But the newbie player actually defeated all 40 enemies and survived with their health bar halfway intact. That's right, the newbie player held down the X button and won. The reason this mindless strategy actually worked for them and not the veteran player is because the downed enemies were much more likely to drop a shield restore pickup. After the space combat mission, I explored a bit of the MTAR Nebula, just to see how they ramped up the challenge for veteran players there. It was a lot more of the same. Fewer health crates were available. When summoning chicken bots, the enemy would summon 6 instead of 4. They tended to fire a larger volley from their guns. Sometimes there were more enemies. Sometimes there were a lot more enemies. In fact, I noticed at one point that there was an extra ammo crate available for the veteran player, probably to help them chew through all the enemies being thrown at them. Now that you know Going Commando uses adaptive difficulty, you might be wondering if other Ratchet and Clank games do as well. And yes, this adaptive difficulty system was imported into the third Ratchet and Clank game, Up Your Arsenal. This is Florana, one of the first worlds in the game. At the entrance to this building, the veteran player encounters 4 hostile natives, instead of the 2 presented to the new player. They also attacked 2 at a time, instead of waiting patiently one after the other. Farther along, on the second floor of the building, the new player will find 2 more hostile natives and a health crate. That health crate is not present for the veteran player, instead replaced by a 3rd enemy. Furthermore, a whopping 5 more enemies will rappel into the room once they're dealt with. Enemies that, you guessed it, do not exist for the player who is struggling. After climbing the ladder, the new player will find 2 natives instead of 3. Hovering down to the green platform, no large swamp monster will attack them. This trend repeats over and over. The better a player performs, the more enemies will show up to confront them, and the fewer health pickups they'll find. Down the zipline await either 4 or 6 blood flies. They'll be joined by 2 swamp monsters, or 1, or perhaps none at all. Climb this final ladder and find either 2 more blood flies and 2 health crates, or 4 blood flies and only 1 health crate. What about the original Ratchet and Clank game, the one released in 2002? Did the adaptive difficulty begin with the first game in the series? It was a lot more difficult for me to spot, but yes, even though it doesn't seem like many enemies are being removed for the less skilled player, it does seem to be that there are more health crates available for them. Here's an example from Metropolis. There's an additional health crate before the bridge. And after crossing this bridge, but before the escalator, you'll see an additional health crate on the left. Here's an example from planet Iridia. In this location, you have to destroy a bunch of sand sharks, and there's an additional health crate hidden behind the rock for the player who's already died to them a few times. So, there you have it. Proof positive that these games take it easy on underperforming players, while also throwing more of a challenge to players who seem to be doing a little too well. Again, there are probably a lot of games that utilize this kind of dynamic difficulty. It's just that most developers, Insomniac included, don't go out of their way to let you know about it. If players are aware of its existence, they might feel like they're being coddled, or that hard-won victories are less meaningful. But without such a system in place, it's easy to imagine inexperienced players getting frustrated, while at the same time leaving skilled players bored. Future entries in the series would offer a selectable difficulty at the start of the game, relinquishing control back to the player. But given the origins of this series, it wouldn't be a shock to learn about some additional difficulty manipulation happening behind the curtains. Designing a video game is a complex process, and there's probably a lot that we don't know about, things that are being done without our knowledge, to provide for us the best possible experience. Special thanks to The Golden Bolt for mentioning this adaptive difficulty system in his Ratchet and Clank retrospective, and to the Useless Podcasts podcast by developers Mike Stout and Tony Garcia, in which they talked about why it was implemented in Going Commando. If you enjoyed hearing me talk about video games at great length, I've got an entire playlist you can enjoy. Thanks for watching,